Hey, what's up? It's Dan Riccio, Randip, Janda. Canucks this week, and the Canucks continue to win hockey games. The record now 20 wins, 8 losses, 4 overtime losses since Bruce Boudreau came in as head coach. Has it changed their trade deadline plans, Randip?
It absolutely has. This was a team, even a month ago, was seen as a guaranteed seller. Now, the record you mentioned, but let me add another one, a 688 points percentage, which is sixth in the NHL since Boudreau took over. They've allowed, the least amount of goals in the NHL in that time as well. Think about that for a second. That's how well they've been playing. And I'm not saying the Vancouver Canucks are going to be buyers, because I know my mentions would be absolutely, just jam packed. I'm not saying they need to buy, but this has changed them from them being an outright seller to at least, Dan, the players having given themselves a chance to prove what they can do. This might be the last hurrah for parts of this core, but I think the Vancouver Canucks, those skaters, those players, Thatcher Demko most importantly, has extended that door just a little bit to say, you're not selling everything. You're not throwing the kitchen sink out. You can actually see what these players can do. It's not a buying situation, but it's a stand pat situation.
See, I think this is pretty much the same thing that Jim Rutherford said when he first showed up in Vancouver of, there's some pieces here, but we are going to have to make some changes to get to the place we want to go. I think as much as this team is having a lot of success right now, everybody can see that a large part of it is their goaltender bailing them out on a lot of nights. They really showed how fragile the Maple Leafs can be, which is much to the chagrin of many Canucks fans, of course. But this is still a team that's not quite good enough to truly be a contender. If they were to sneak into the playoffs, how would they fare against a Colorado or a Calgary? That's a real question mark that I think a lot of people would have. So it's very much still the same that Jim Rutherford said from day one. We've got to make some big decisions here. We've got to get a cap cushion so that we can do some other things. I think that's always been the case for this team. And that hasn't changed despite their record. Maybe it's changed the way they're evaluating certain players, but I don't think it's changed their overall plan for how they see this team moving forward.
Well, the long-term plan is still a long-term plan because you've got a organization that doesn't have that many prospects. They don't have depth. So in the long term, absolutely, Jim Rutherford's plan is not going to change. You have to add more to this organization, and that might be done by extracting an important player or two because you need depth, you need quality. But in the short term, though, is that going to happen at this deadline? Because when I think about a roster shakeup, a restructuring, whatever you want to call it, that maybe makes a little bit more sense in the offseason. For the very least, at the very least right now, this group of players has said, all right, there's no pressing needs in terms of UFAs, really some big names that this team doesn't have that situation right now.
Yeah.
So at the very least, Dan, you can move forward and say, hey, JT Miller, important player, arguably outside of Thatcher Demko, the most important player on this team right now. You don't need to trade him unless you get that Godfather offer. Brock Besser, yeah, that contract situation isn't great because you have a qualifying offer of $7.5 million. But guess what? It's not pressing immediately. You can deal with that in the offseason. So as far as pressure points are concerned, Dan, this team doesn't have many except one, and his name is Tyler Motte.
Yeah, and that's really the one move that they have to make, and we'll get to Mott in a second. But I just don't feel like this team has the itchy trigger finger like John Travolta in Pulp Fiction or anything like that. That's what we all thought when the new regime came into place, but that's just clearly not how they're going about this. And the biggest name has been JT Miller, right? He's going to the New York Rangers and the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we've had these discussions here on the YouTube channel. And I do think that, it's still it's still possible JT Miller does get traded at some point out of Vancouver because he's an unrestricted free agent in just over a year from now. But it's going to take a massive offer to move off of this player. And I think if nothing else, how he's played lately, how big of a leader he's been for this team, how good he's been on the ice. Like, he's basically a top 10 scorer over the last 3 seasons with the Vancouver Canucks. So if anything, they're more emboldened to hold on to JT Miller for the offer that they truly covet, that they truly think is worth moving off this player right now.
Yeah, if you needed confirmation of why a huge offer is going to take, to get this deal done, you had that on the East Coast trip where he showed up in Toronto. He showed up in the New York Islanders game. This is a guy that, in those big moments, yeah, he's not the perfect player. He's going to make the occasional mistake. I like to compare him to like an Alexei Kovalev type of player, right? Where there's going to be moments where you're kind of scratching your head saying, what are you doing on that back check? Where is that back check? But the special aspect, the way he can slow down a game, the dual threat, the playmaking, that's the reason you're looking at a pretty significant offer. And what that is, there's a couple of teams out there that I think have incentive to make those deals and pay a big price because they're all in right now, right? You look at the Colorado Avalanche, that's a team that I think needs to do something pretty substantial down the middle. Could they come with that sort of offer? Potentially. The New York Rangers, maybe they're in that conversation as well. But if anything, his play this year, but at the most recent stretch, is emboldened on why you need that big offer. Otherwise, they don't need to trade him before the 21st. This is something that you look at the offseason and say, all right, with more cap room, more interested parties, Dan, you might actually have more players taking a look at JT Miller if they can clear up some cap space. So I understand the pressure points now. Contenders are maybe willing to play that price, but do you have more individuals or teams that would be interested come the offseason?
Yeah, and we know, what is it that it's going to make Patrick Allvin, the general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, think about trading a JT Miller? It's a big-time young defenseman. It's Bowen Byram in Colorado. It's Braden Schneider in the New York Rangers organization. Maybe if the Leafs were to come in, it's Topi Niemelä plus something else, right? So there's got to be the big young defenseman that the Canucks truly need for their organization. We talked about this when the rumors with the New York Rangers first started to pop up a little while back here on the YouTube channel. It's what the Canucks truly covet is a young defenseman to bring into their organization that will really help them, will really complement Quinn Hughes. And that, I don't know if there's much more that would really get them to move off of JT Miller right now. Like, you can give them all the first round picks in the world, as if they're like past 25th overall, it's not really moving the needle all that much. It really comes down to the level of prospect, how they feel about that prospect that might make them think about it before March 21st.
Well, a part of that is also, generally when you think of trade offers, you think of quality versus quantity, right? In this case, the Canucks, they're going to need quality based on that defensive need that they have. They've got nothing coming up. There was a hope that Jet Wu would maybe become that player that could play next to Quinn Hughes. Jet's development hasn't gone that way. He's in the AHL. And to be quite honest, he looks like a fringe NHLer at best. And beyond that, you're going to need somebody on that right-hand side, that quality. So to me, the quantity, the three or four pieces that are being rumored, hey, the three or four pieces, if Philip Hedl is one of them, and Vitaly Kravtsov is another, those are two pieces that you're not really all that excited about, especially with Kravtsov, because he hasn't had a very strong, relationship in the NHL with his current team. And that is a damaging thing. I think quality here and that, right shot defenseman, preferably right shot defenseman, is priority. So I don't care about the three or four pieces. Are you getting something back that is substantial? And that's the most important thing if they make a deal, especially if they make it in the offseason or even here at the deadline.
A quick thought on Tyler Motte, who is the most likely player to get traded away from the Vancouver Canucks. Look, he's been a really good find for the Canucks. Thomas Vanek trade deadline deal a couple of years ago.
When Vancouver melted down, yes.
Yes, including myself. They should have just got a draft pick. Who's Tyler Motte? And he's turned out to be a really good bottom six forward for them. And I think would be a really good find for a contender. What it's going to come down to is, do the Canucks want to keep this player? Kind of like... Look, I don't think he gets a Brandon Tanev type contract, but, we know Jim Rutherford is willing to go into term with bottom six players that he really likes. And I think Tyler Motte has won over the organization in the last 2 months.
One key thing is, though, when you make that Brandon Tanev comparison to Tyler Motte, the Pittsburgh Penguins were in a different situation altogether. They wanted to win immediately, so therefore they would be willing to overpay, extend term. Whereas the Canucks, they're in a different part of their build. And as much as I love Tyler Motte's game, which is built for the playoffs, he kills penalties, He can hit you in transition. He can, score goals against the grain. I love all of that. That's important. But here's the problem. He's an oft injured player that with this team, especially the way that their window is going, a long-term deal, in my opinion, doesn't make sense. And if I'm Tyler Motte and his agent, I'm asking for around $3 million. That's my ask. You're probably going to have something maybe in the $2.5 million range, but you are looking for probably around 4 years. Do the Vancouver Canucks need to tie in a player that, has, a very long injury history, and credit to him for coming back, but that's a part of his resume. Good player, but do you need to tie him in for that long? You've got William Lockwood, who's a standout in the AHL that's coming up, can profile the same way. I don't see this as a deal that makes sense for the Canucks. I know they're not sellers, but when you have a pressure point like this and your team is not a Stanley Cup contending team, you have to look down the line. And to me, a Tyler Motte trade is the one that makes sense this year.
Yeah, and it's projected to cost them over $2 million a year to keep him in Vancouver. Maybe able to get a second-round pick for him at the deadline. We'll see how much interest there may be. Final thought, Randip. I know you're drinking all the dud sodas right now. Do you think the Canucks actually pull it off and make the miracle run to the playoffs?
I might be drinking dud soda, but I'm not drinking Kool-Aid. This team, I've loved what they've able to do. Thatcher Demko's been all world. They're not making the playoffs. The Central is starting to heat up. The Central is still probably going to get both wild card spots. The Edmonton Oilers, I have no idea what's going on with you right now. And the Vancouver Canucks, as admirable as it's been, the final 25 games here, I think they're going to come up short. I think the Central gets both spots because look at the Dallas Stars. The Nashville Predators are hanging around there as well. Minnesota's not going to be this bad down the stretch. Those teams, on top of the ones we already talked about in St. Louis and Colorado, those are teams that are going to hang around. And the Pacific, Vegas is not great right now. You look at LA, I think they can be a playoff team as well. Vancouver, just outside the playoff bar for me.
Bruce, there it is. It's not doing it for you, eh?
No, everything's got
drink some of the Kool-Aid.
Everything's got 15 minutes, man. Everybody's got 15 minutes.
You know what? I'm much more of a believer now than I was maybe at any other point during the run. Vegas keeps losing. The possibilities are there for the Vancouver Canucks. They've still got to play at about a 660 points percentage clip, but this team's believing right now. I still give it less than a 50-50 chance, but I'm definitely more of a believer today than I was at any other point in this Canucks season other than before it actually started.
Wait. You said less than a 50% chance. So with me. You agree with me.
I'm just saying I'm more of a believer than I ever was, Randy. Possibilities are there. What do you think of the Vancouver Canucks chances? Let us know in the comment section. Is it a mistake if they don't sell at the deadline? We'll respond to as many as we can. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.